Blog Talk Radio.
Coming to you live, it's ATL Prime Sports from Atlanta, Georgia. I'm Todd Corder along with JJ on the other side of the ATL, Mark Mancini in Los Angeles, and our producer Wayne in snowy Memphis, Tennessee. Another edition of ATL Prime Sports. Our guest today, who'll be calling in shortly, DeShaun Tate, Mr. 94 by 50, college and NBA basketball analyst, formerly of 92.9 The Game. He is covering the NCAA tournament for 92.9 The Game. He'll be joining us shortly. DeShaun has been on ATL Prime Sports many times, and we love his basketball analysis. Guys, welcome. Last week we were off. You know what? Let's get right into it. You can get a hold of myself, or you can get a hold of all of us at ATL Prime Sports. You can get a hold of myself at Corder Todd, Mark out in Los Angeles at Mancini Sports, JJ at JJ Get You One, and Wayne at RWY Jr. out in Memphis. The show is on social media. Tweet us a question. We'll be glad to answer it and get back to you as promptly as possible. Guys, let's start off with our NBA talk till we get DeShaun on. Wayne and I talked about the Atlanta Hawks on Tuesday. They are coming off one of their most important victories of the season, defeating a struggling Boston Celtics team who had lost 7 of 10 games. Good effort by the Hawks, much better defense against the Celtics, a team, like I said, who is struggling. Trae Young ended up with 40. Clint Capella was in the 20s, and he had some good boards. And let's talk about those Atlanta Hawks and the NBA and some college basketball with our guest today, DeShaun Tate. DeShaun, welcome to ATL Prime Sports, my friend.
No, I appreciate you guys for having me. It's always a blessing when I have the opportunity to join you guys, and I'm just thankful and grateful and overly appreciative that I could be a part of it and that you guys are sharing the space with me.
Hey, no problem. I'm glad you're having on. We just talked about the Hawks and just mentioned it in the opening. They are coming off a victory over Boston, a team that had struggled, lost 7 of 10. Trae Young, 40 points. Clint Capella in the 20s. And to me, the Clint Capella in the 20s and the better defense is the bigger story than Trae Young scoring 40. DeShaun, this is a team that's been criticized heavily in the media about playing defense. And you know what? They stepped up. Let's see if they can continue with it.
Yeah, I think one of the things, particularly for that Boston game, that was impressive outside of shooting 57% from the field, which I know that I've been in quite a few of those post-game press conferences with Lloyd Pierce, and he's kind of implemented how important it is to make open shots and to be able to check somebody, making the opposition feel you when they're on the defensive end, but even more so on the offensive end, the points in the paint that they've been able to accumulate has been something that has definitely benefited them down the stretch. So this is definitely a team that does need to pull some things together. I mean, in the month of February alone, they're 2-7. That includes a 3-game losing streak and a 4-game losing streak. And, again, it's only going to get much harder as they have Boston, Denver, and Cleveland, 2 of the 3 on the road up next. So I think it'll be interesting to find out where things go from here, particularly until Lloyd Pierce is able to return, which we know he will be out for at least one more game.
Hey, DeShaun, the key to me for the Hawks' recovery, and the guys believe me on this. We've talked about this off the air. The key to them in their struggles, and now with the recovery, is DeAndre Hunter has been out. Their defense has really taken a hit with him out. They allowed 118 a game before. It was 109 with DeAndre. What is DeAndre's status, and when is he coming back?
Yeah, I think DeAndre is still out for at least another probably game or two. Or I think that right now he's in the process of finishing up rehab and things like that. Still getting some shots up. I'm not sure in terms of how much time up and down the floor that he's been able to be able to have in terms of reacclimating himself and so forth. But the injury has definitely had an effect. But I'm not going to sit here and believe or buy for just 1 second that DeAndre is the reason behind why we've seen some of the recent Hawks struggles. Now, collectively, maybe. I mean, this is also a team that went out and acquired or traded for certain players, at least about a good 6 of them. I haven't really seen any of those guys completely healthy. Now, it's very rare that you're going to see a team completely healthy anyway, so I don't think we can automatically point the finger at that. When you start talking about those pieces, those key pieces, the Rajon Rondos, the Chris Dunns, the Danilo Gallinari's in that same conversation that was out with an injury. Bogdan Bogdanovic was out with an injury as well. A lot of those guys have just not been able to put it all together since they've been in an Atlanta Hawk uniform, and that's part of the unfortunate part. A little bit unfair to Lloyd Pierce, but this isn't a game of fair. Life is not fair. And it's a business. It's not a 2K. It's not a video game.
You're listening to DeShaun Tate here on ATL Prime Sports. Let's stick with those Hawks. You kind of mentioned it there at the end. I want to get your opinion on the Hawks' chances of retaining Lloyd Pierce if they don't make the playoffs this year.
I don't think it's likely. I'm not even sure if Lloyd is going to make it out of the season. Does he deserve to be? I think so. I wouldn't be totally mad if they didn't make that decision until after. Definitely feel my own way about if they decided to do it during Black History Month, but that's a different conversation. In the same token, though, I like him as a person, but again, this isn't about being fair. This is a business, and I think that Lloyd understands that. He came into the year with the assumption of knowing exactly what I would imagine, under the assumption of knowing what he had to do, what had to get done, what the expectations are, and that is a playoff appearance. I'm one of those people that believes that he knows what has to be done and what could potentially happen if he does not meet or exceed the expectations. Do I think it's right, wrong, or indifferent? I don't know. That's not really up to me. I don't get paid to make those kind of decisions. But I will say enough to say that him as a coach, there have been some questionable things, and there's going to be some fingers pointed at him that I also think is unfair because it's some team issues that's included in that. And he's not the one that's putting the ball in the basket either. So I think the players have to take just as much blame as Lloyd would have to take in that situation.
And I agree with that, DeShaun. I really do. I think Lloyd Pierce has done a good job with what he's been given. This is really the first year we can agree that he's had influx of players that you can really compete with besides just Trae Young and the young guys, Kevin Huerter, DeAndre, those types of guys. So I'm with you right there. I think if the Hawks miss the playoffs very close, they'll take into account the injuries. But you're right, this is a business. You do have to get some results, or else what are you doing here? So I agree 100% with you there, DeShaun. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. And I love the things that he's been able to do within the community and all that good stuff. We also understand that this is about wins and losses. This is not about being a good Samaritan, although I do like to think that helps. And I've reached out to him multiple times and let him know that I do appreciate his contribution to the community and so forth. But
absolutely,
like I said, Lloyd has to get it done. And even coming into the situation, I mean, replacing Mike Budenholzer, you're a first-year head coach. There's a lot of, at least I personally was under the impression and or me feeling a way of, in a roundabout way, knowing that, you are the guy that's having to come in and going to have to deal with a lot of the grunt work. Nobody was returning from those teams, with the exception, I think, of one guy, maybe Kent Bazemore from those teams, and that it is a real rebuild process. And once that process is established, then they'll be going probably after the coach that they really ultimately wanted to get, or get somebody that can fill the needs after that point, unless he exceeded the expectations. So that's just kind of, my personal thoughts on Lloyd.
You know, DeShaun, Mark Mancini out here in Los Angeles. And when I think of the Hawks, I think of an organization that, you know, you had a couple good coaches there in Lenny Wilkins. And the last coach you had there that made this team, you know, reputable and it scared a lot of guys was Mike Woodson. And then he was let go. And I remember his assistant coach, I was good friends with him, Jim Todd. But when you look at this organization after that, you know, Budenholzer was there, and then he went to Milwaukee and has kept the Bucks intact. What's the mindset been since Woodson left that this team can't get back up to that level where Woodson took them for a few years? What is it? Is it inexperienced coaching down the line, or is it just the culture needs to be changed? I know you got a superstar in Trae Young, but what needs to get it back up to where Mike Woodson brought it?
Well, I think that was part of it, is being able to establish getting a guy in like Trae Young that is a star or all-star or superstar type or caliber of player. I think that's the first piece of it, and I don't want to overshadow or overlook what Mike Budenholzer has put into place, because at one point in time and for a long time during that season, they were the number one team in the NBA in terms of the record. And ended up, you know, setting some records as a franchise particularly. So he obviously did a very good job. But I think another piece of it is getting guys coming in from free agency, making sure that you're doing a good year, doing a good job at drafting. I know that the general manager in Travis Schlenk has tried to kind of replicate what we've seen in Golden State. That hasn't really panned out as well, which I don't think was the smartest decision necessarily. I think it's good to implement some of that in it, but to try to emulate exactly what Golden State was, that's something that's totally different, because if you try to implement that with with draft picks, that's one thing, but I think that you're expecting your draft picks to have the same type of mentality and chemistry of Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, and all those guys, which makes it a little bit different. Even guys down the line of the bench and things like that, some of the better role players that they had, Andre Iguodala and so forth. But regardless of that, like I said, I think it was about getting a star player. The next step being getting some guys that actually want to go and come to Atlanta. What has been the biggest – listen, why isn't this a place that people would want to come to? You know, we're talking about, you know, nightlife and big city, fairly decent size, pretty good size, you know, market, and you know what kind of triggers a lot of the younger guys nowadays in terms of, you know, entertainment and music and so forth, and the culture and everything like that. But they just haven't been able to land those types of players. Well, now that you got Trae Young, I like to think that there's some players that would, some higher caliber players that would like to enjoy coming over, because they'll get the ball. Trae Young, one of the better assist players in the league, but in the same token, he's got a green light that a lot of other guys are not going to have because of his volume shooting and so forth. So I think that those are just some of the reasons behind why, you know, we haven't exactly seen Atlanta take that next step. Last year was kind of premature. People had high expectations, but there won't be any excuses this time around this year, I don't think. I mean, at some point, you have to stop accepting the mediocrity, and you have to start living up to some of the expectations and showing that you're taking steps towards that. I'll tell you one thing that's not helping is this being a team that was really off to a really good start, one of the better rebounding teams in the league, one of the better free throw shooting teams in the league, and then, you know, turn around and then they go on a slump. They try to come back out of that, getting back into, you know, a number 6 spot in the East, and then within 2 weeks, they're like 11th in the East, and now they're trying to build themselves a way back up out of that. So while it seems like they're trending in the wrong direction, I still like to think that there's still enough basketball yet left to be played that can maybe turn some of this stuff around.
You're listening to DeShaun Tate here on ATL Prime Sports. Tate's Takes, 94 feet by 50. DeShaun, thanks for coming on. Let's go over to the NBA All-Star Game, which is going to be here on March 7th. Keisha Lance Bottoms, the mayor of Atlanta, is afraid of the All-Star game coming here because of the virus. She doesn't want any fans in the stands. She's afraid a lot of folks are going to go down and party. What is your take on that? I would like to see fans in the stands. The party and stuff, I don't know how you can control that. But, the Hawks have fans in the stands during the regular season. Definitely the league needs the money. They need the exposure on television. And bringing fans in the stands would help limit them out. What is your opinion on that?
Yeah, it's just really all about the safety and the protocols of COVID. This is probably not the most ideal place, considering COVID, to try and have an all-star game, considering it is Atlanta. I just talked about the entertainment, the music, and all the festivities. And, listen, do I need to really mention gentlemen clubs and things like that? And that part is a huge concern, obviously.
You're right.
And when we were talking about this thing being locked up in the bubble, we saw Lou Williams and this player and that player kind of sneaking out and kind of doing their own thing and so forth, and not really staying to the script of the way that the NBA was trying to put in place of the bubble. It's going to be a really hard sell for me to believe that you've got that many guys, especially a lot more younger guys now in the league versus what it used to be when I was growing up, that is going to be disciplined enough to stick to that script. And this isn't about putting something like this in place to win a national championship. To win a world championship. We're talking about them putting something in place like this to be able to have an all-star game, an all-star weekend. I think it was a very smart idea to do everything on Sundays, to be able to come out maybe with the announcement that there aren't going to be any festivities, don't come from out of town. Maybe what that ended up doing is letting people know who didn't already know that the All-Star game was going to be in Atlanta, so that people are automatically thinking like, oh, All-Star game is in Atlanta? Thanks, Keisha Lance Bottoms. I didn't know that. But now that was said, I'm going to kind of overlook everything else you said and make sure that I'm in Atlanta for that, because I know that the stars are coming out and so forth. But it was smart to do everything within that one day, so that it doesn't lead people to believe or think that it's going to be an entire weekend based in field. As far as Atlanta goes within the city, she had an opportunity to shut some of those things down in terms of, the city of Atlanta and so forth, and make sure that everybody was quarantining or doing whatever, what have you, that they were supposed to be doing. But this is all about money. It's a money grab. The NCAA tournament's going to go on because of money. The All-Star weekend is going to go on because of money. And in some cases, some people say, listen, this stuff has to go on at some point. We can only control what we can control. Try to mandate masks being worn and so forth, different things like that. But I'm not in love with the idea that it was an All-Star weekend being put in place. I'm even more not in love with the fact that it's going to be in Atlanta specifically during a time like this.
Wow.
You're listening to DeShaun Tate right here on ATL Prime Sports. You can find him on Twitter at Tate Hoops. Let's switch over to college basketball real quick. The Dogs had a big win at home versus Missouri Tuesday. Are they in or out of the dance right now? They got 3 winnable games on their schedule at Florida, and they host Louisiana State and South Carolina. What do you think the Dogs' chances of making the tournament are?
Yeah, I don't think that the chances are really that good right now. They're 13-8, 6-8 in conference play. Listen, they've played only one ranked team this season. The good part about that, I guess, is that they're unbeaten after beating a top 10 ranked team at the time in Missouri. So they are 1-0 in that particular department. And, I mean, Missouri, who was playing some of the best basketball nationally at that time, ended up, with 2 back-to-back losses going into the Georgia game. And Georgia did exactly what they were supposed to do, and that's take advantage. They shot 45+% from the field and from 3 in that particular game. Severe Wheeler has been Mr. Everything for them. I really, really love that kid from a point guard perspective. P.J. Horn, who is a transfer from Virginia Tech, is going to be a very important key piece to what this team's success and how far that they can go. Kamara, very much of the same thing defensively. Kier, who was also a transfer, has been stepping up from a scoring standpoint, maybe not in the last game, but over the course of this past season. Going forward, they have Florida tomorrow. That's a rivalry game. They could really use that one because right now Florida is not a lock, but Florida is very likely to make the tournament. They're on a 2-game losing streak, so guess what? Georgia has to have the mentality of treating that Florida game much like they did Missouri when they were on a 2-game losing streak. LSU is coming up after that. That's a home game in Athens for the Dogs. LSU is talented. Cam Thomas, probably certainly one of the best freshmen in the country that nobody's talking about, but they're a vulnerable team. They're undisciplined. They don't always play together. And then following that up to finish off the regular season, they've got South Carolina, which I believe is a must-win. They need some confidence entering the SEC tournament. But Georgia's one of those teams that needs the SEC conference tournament. There's been so many talks about there not being a conference tournament, and it's kind of pointless for so many years. This particular year, maybe not it being a conference tournament all across the board. I do believe from what I'm hearing right now is that there will be one, but I don't think that there's a single team in the SEC conference tournament that Georgia can't beat. That's including Alabama. After all, it is March.
You're listening to DeShaun Tate here on ATL Prime Sports. Let's go from Georgia over to Georgia Tech, DeShaun. The Jackets are 6-6 in conference play, 10-8 overall. Stuck down towards the middle of a rough and tough ACC, even though it doesn't seem as rough and tough as other years. Duke is down. North Carolina, they're hanging around. They could still make the tournament. Georgia Tech, how come they've been down for so long, and what is it going to take to get them back?
Well, I think a huge part of that, honestly, has been recruiting. You know, you brought Josh Pastner in here, and while he hasn't necessarily done the greatest job in the world, one thing that he has done is his primary focus, which he's mentioned multiple of times, is getting old and staying old. And that's something that they've been able to do. I love Mike DeVoe, and while I'm not the biggest fan of Jose Alvarado, I do love the leadership capabilities that he brings, and kind of like that chip on his shoulder type of mentality. You know, there's not very many years where Georgia Tech will beat a team like Kentucky, North Carolina, Clemson when they were ranked, and Florida State, who's near the top of the ACC currently and has been over the course of the last handful of seasons or so, and then end up missing the NCAA tournament. They were actually, Georgia Tech, speaking of, one of the teams that I thought benefited the most from there being a COVID break last year, because they did decide at that time to do the self-imposed ban, and that counted for them. So to be able to make the NCAA tournament this year is something I think they especially needed to do, because this is a year that the ACC is so down. Much like the Atlanta Hawks, I think that Georgia Tech was in position to being forced to do something that is similar to the Hawks. That's beat the teams that you're supposed to beat. Also beat the teams that you're equally quality as good as. And if you don't do anything else, you have to contend against those teams. You have to at least be competitive. Moses Wright, if he's not the most improved player in the country, he's certainly the most improved player that a lot of people just really aren't talking about on both ends of the floor within the ACC. They've got one up tomorrow. When we were talking about teams that they need to make sure that they beat, they play Miami tomorrow. That is a must-win scenario for them, much like I was speaking about Georgia in playing South Carolina. You have to beat the teams that you're supposed to beat, try and gather up some confidence going into the conference tournament, where, again, I'm not really sure that there's a team out there looking at the ACC, like when I said the same thing about Georgia and the SEC, where there's not a team that they can't beat on the right night. I think Georgia Tech is in that same conversation when it comes to the opponents in the ACC conference tournament.
You know, DeShaun, looking at the national level here, and I know we're up against the clock, too, in this great show, I like Mark Few and Gonzaga, and I don't like them because they're the number one team in the country. It's just consistency over a long period of time. I think they have a great chance to win it this year. But the two teams I'm going to hold my hat on, and you might be surprised, I'm going with Alabama number 8 at 17-5, and I like San Diego State. I like those two teams. I like these sleepers, and who knows, maybe Alabama can duplicate what their football team did and have back-to-back national titles in basketball and football. Any thoughts to the three squads that I just brought up, Gonzaga, Alabama, and San Diego State?
Well, first for Alabama, I think that they're a 2 seed right now in terms of from where I see them if the tournament was starting right now. When I look at a team like Alabama, they don't have really a ton of really impressive wins on their resume. I know that they went on a nice streak of games that they have won, but how many of them really impressed? At number 7 at the time, Tennessee, that doesn't hold nearly as much weight as a lot of people might think that it does. I'm not really much of a believer in Tennessee, partially because of Rick Barnes reminds me so much of a guy that we were talking about earlier in Mike Budenholzer, where they're really good, recruiter or really good regular season coach, but not nearly as much in the postseason. Florida's a decent win. Arkansas, you don't really know if some days they're looking like a good win, some days they're not. Winning against LSU is very much in a very similar conversation. But Alabama scoring the basketball at a high clip, obviously, just put up 115 points on Georgia last week. And then, Nate Oates definitely, after some of the comments that he made about Coach K earlier in the year, he needed to have a similar season like this one, if I'm just being honest. But they shoot it really well from 3. When they're not shooting it really well from 3, they're losing those games, and that's a recipe for disaster in a lot of cases. Now, as far as San Diego State, they got a much-needed win against Fresno, who they'll play back-to-back again, I think against Fresno today or tomorrow. But they've strung together some decent wins as well. I mean, they've beat St. Mary's, who's typically at the top of the West Coast Conference. They've beaten Nevada twice. They swept those guys. They've beaten UCLA, who essentially is kind of considered a power in college basketball in general, traditionally. They're one of those ones that is trying to show, hey, we still have a little bit left after last year and the kind of run. That's between them and Dayton. I feel the worst about them because of last year, and a lot of people think that they could have made a run to the national championship. Now, when it comes to this team by the name of Gonzaga, okay, I'm going to try and get through this the best way I can. Gonzaga hasn't played any true road games versus above-average teams. Now, many people are going to say, well, that really doesn't matter all that much. There's no fans in the building anyway. They'd probably still win those games, and you can't blame them because they have wins over Kansas, Auburn, West Virginia, Iowa, the defending national champions, Virginia, even though that game against Baylor that everybody was looking forward to was postponed. But I do believe that Gonzaga also have defensive deficiencies that are hidden sometimes behind their high-octane offense. They're going to be unbeaten from what I expect entering on Selection Sunday. The trouble or concerning thing about them for me is they give me a feel that they could be similar to a Duke team that we've seen in 2006 against LSU with Tyrus Thomas, Big Baby Davis, where they ran up on athletes and experience and disciplined teams and then ended up not knowing really what to do with it. Gonzaga is a team that has needed for all these years to beef up their non-conference schedule, and they've done exactly that, okay? And they've won a lot of those games. Some of them they lost, many of them that they won. Then they have to adjust to West Coast Conference competition in a regular year for 18 games and then readjust to a win-or-go-home scenario against non-conference opponents all over again. That's one of the reasons why I think that you haven't seen them cut down the nets just yet. They do themselves essentially kind of like a disservice by doing that. You've got to at least join the Pac-12. If you don't join the Pac-12, that's fine. You've got to play the Mountain West, San Diego State, New Mexico's, and so forth. John Stockton's not walking back through that door. Okay, this is a mid-major institution that's participating in a mid-major conference, easily one of the upper Power 6 programs in the country. Number
hey,
one
DeShaun,
rating in field
I
goal
hate to
percentage.
interrupt you, but we're almost out of time. We got about 20 seconds left. Thank you so much for coming on today.
No worries.
Guys, thank all of you. It's been another great edition of ATL Prime Sports. We'll have you back, DeShaun. Some other time we'll talk national college basketball some more. We'll get into our schools, Michigan and Michigan State, respectfully. All right, everybody, thank you very much. It's been a great show. Monday, we'll be back with me, JJ, and Wayne. Everyone, have a great weekend.